Hello, I am Peter Okwoche. Welcome to Focus on Africa. Our top stories. Cyclone Idai could be the worst weather-related disaster ever to hit the southern hemisphere, says the UN. It warns of a nightmare scenario with parts of Mozambique totally underwater. Mozambique's government says 600,000 people have been affected. The former First Lady, Graça Machel, tells us there needs to be an urgent international response.
We need support from the international community. The magnitude and the complexity of this crisis is not in the hands of one single government.
Meanwhile, in neighboring Zimbabwe, search and rescue operations continue. So how do you deal with a disaster on this scale? We'll be asking the United Nations. Also on this program, this is how he rolls. Meet the 16-year-old rollerblade champion from Senegal who wants to get everybody involved in the sport.
I want to say to everybody that they should try to do inline skating in life.
And in sports, could the Women's World Cup be heading to South Africa? Thanks for joining us here on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Possibly one of the worst ever weather-related disasters in the Southern Hemisphere. That's how a United Nations official has described Cyclone Idai, which has devastated parts of Southern Africa. The storm hit Mozambique's port city of Beira on Thursday last week, with winds of up to 177 kilometers an hour. But aid teams only reached the city on Sunday. Beira is home to 500,000 people, and the International Federation of the Red Cross has described the damage as massive and horrifying. Mozambique's President Filipe Nyusi fears up to 1,000 people could be dead. In Zimbabwe, at least 98 people have died and more than 200 are missing. President Mnangagwa says the government is carrying out rescue missions and delivering food aid, and a state of emergency has been declared. Our reporter Shingai Nyoka is in Chipinge.
The cyclone has carved out a whole new landscape. Rivers and waterfalls now flow where generations have lived, communities separated and in need of help. The weak, the old, women with children on their backs have trekked for hours through mud to get to safety. This makeshift centre has only the basics: food, shelter, a few medicines for the injured. We've heard harrowing stories. Some rescuers have told me of homes and also bodies being washed away in the rivers below, washed away to Mozambique, which is behind this mountain range, gone, never to come back again. The trauma of the last few days is written on most faces here. Many homes collapsed as people slept. Sarah Mhlanga managed to escape. Her job as a survivor has been to bury the dead.
Most of the bodies were badly decomposed. We weren't able to move them, and we had to bury them in pairs because we didn't have enough coffins. Yesterday we buried 70 people.
Others are making their way back through the treacherous roads to search for their loved ones. Kururu Nyakare's uncle and his wife have been missing for days.
We are not confident, but we want to get information so that we're going to get help from other people or from well-wishers.
Many more people remain huddled in schools and basic clinics waiting for help.
My mother, my father, my 2 young sisters, one of whom had just had a child, they are all dead.
My house was destroyed in the floods and I was buried underneath. My daughter was with me in bed and was washed away from me.
Pictures are starting to emerge from neighboring Mozambique, confirmation that rescue operations are finally underway. As the death toll continues to rise in both countries, Zimbabwe is struggling to keep up. 2 countries are now united in mourning. Shingai Nyoka, BBC News, Chimanimani.
Well, Mozambique's former First Lady, Graça Machel, spoke exclusively to our correspondent Milton Nkosi earlier today. She says this is a problem too big for the country to handle alone and is asking for an urgent international response.
The situation in Beira, Sofala and Manica today is much worse than what we have seen in 2000. Communications are totally broken. There's no yet a thorough information of where are the people, how many people are stranded in villages, how many people are dying, how many people need really health assistance. So it's a very, very dire. The needs are simply of everything, from food, medicine, clothes.
What do you want the international community to do?
I called the Deputy Secretary General of the UN this morning, Amina Mohammed, and I asked the United Nations to send a specialized team to do the assessment. We need to know the magnitude, the depth, the extension, the complexity of this tragedy, which we don't have. Second, it is 3 countries which are involved. It's not only Mozambique, it's Zimbabwe and Malawi. So we need the United Nations to look at the 3 countries, and they have to make a common appeal, a joint appeal as a region.
As far as you are concerned, is the Mozambican government equipped to deal with such a disaster?
Now, the magnitude and the complexity of this crisis is not in the hands of one single government. We need support from the international community. I know that the government is doing its best. As we speak, President Nyusi is meeting the cabinet in Beira to have a much clearer assessment of the situation.
You know, we've been through the wars. We covered the 2000 floods, and now we're here 2019. How does that make you feel as a mother, a grandmother?
Haven't I seen enough? Do I need this again? I have no right to feel the exhaustion, which I have to accept. It is there, but I have no right. And that's why I'm making this appeal. I am in a position, in a platform where I can speak to the world.
That's the former Mozambican First Lady, Graça Machel there. Let's get more now on the humanitarian situation on the ground. Gemma Collin is head of the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs and joins me live from Maputo. Thank you very much. Graça Machel talks there about international intervention. Can you just tell me what the scale of that international help is at the moment in those 3 countries?
Absolutely, and thanks so much for having me. So what we're looking at across the 3 countries is we are doing targeted responses. Each of these contexts has unique needs, and each of these contexts has unique people. So we're making sure that each of the responses is tailored to the exact situation on the ground. Here in Mozambique, where I'm in Maputo right now, we are activating a number of mechanisms from the international community, bringing in aid and supplies, bringing in dedicated emergency workers, because what we're facing here is a tremendously challenging and extremely complex response. The reason for that is because many of the areas that have been hardest hit, not just by the cyclone, because it's important to remember that before the cyclone, there were floods caused by this pressure system, and after the cyclone, we've had more floods, with dams breaking their banks and rivers overflowing. So we're looking at multiple areas in Mozambique that are now affected, many areas that are underwater, and potentially entire communities that have been swept away.
Okay, I mean, one of your colleagues has described this rather as possibly one of the worst natural disasters in the Southern Hemisphere. Your priorities obviously will be rescuing some of the victims. How is that going?
So the government is leading the search and rescue efforts. In addition, we're calling in specialised teams, which we're hoping will be able to land in the coming days. We've got the government working around the clock to make sure that the rescue efforts happen, and we already have additional search and rescue teams on the ground. These are, however, incredibly complex efforts. We've got fast-flowing floodwaters that are making the rescue efforts incredibly difficult, and on a daily basis, it's increasingly challenging to know which areas are going to be the hardest hit and which are going to be underwater in need of the most urgent rescue efforts. So search and rescue is happening, but it's complex, it's challenging, and it's going to be difficult to get to all of the places that need to be reached.
Now, we knew about this weather front last week. How come the United Nations and the governments in that region were not better prepared for this? Did you underestimate the challenge?
So the government and the United Nations were both prepared. The challenge that we always have in an instance like this is that there are some things that we can't prepare for. So although we had teams pre-positioned, and the government, for example, in Mozambique had set up Kaya as a base to work from because they knew that the Sofala region would be impacted, then what we didn't anticipate and what became tremendously challenging was to get teams in by road. The roads were swept away at a rate that we hadn't anticipated. So even the best prepared efforts can face challenges when the reality hits the ground.
Okay, that's Gemma Connell there from the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Thanks a lot for talking to us here on Focus in Africa. Let's take a quick look now at other stories making the headlines across Africa and the rest of the world. Algeria's new deputy prime minister says President Abdelaziz Bouteflika, who's been in office since 1999, will now hand over power to an elected president when his mandate ends next month, despite previously refusing to stand down. But hundreds of school teachers, students and health workers took to the streets of the capital, Algiers, once again calling for the 82-year-old Bouteflika to resign immediately. Rolling power blackouts in South Africa are causing severe disruption on the roads as well as for businesses and residents. Eskom, which supplies more than 90% of the country's power, has suffered repeated faults at its coal-fired power stations since last Thursday. It's not known when the power will be fully restored. And Ethiopia says it wants to indefinitely postpone its national census because conflict in the country has forced more than 1 million people to become homeless. The count, which has already been put on hold for 2 consecutive years, was due to take place next month. The results would not only determine the country's population, but would also influence the allocation of budgets for each region. Parliament now has the final say. Now, we've been talking about how devastating Cyclone Idai has been in Mozambique, Zimbabwe and Malawi. Well, it's also been blamed for the late rains in northwest Kenya, where more than 1 million people in the Turkana district are already in need of food assistance due to an ongoing drought. The Kenyan government has said more than 1.1 million people are facing food shortages and measures are being put in place to deliver food and water. Roncliffe Odit has more on the story.
Pain, anguish and hunger is what welcomes you to these villages here in Turkana County, northern Kenya. Over 11 people have already succumbed and many more are staring at death should the prevailing situation remain. For young children in drought-stricken areas of Kenya, primary schools providing free lunchtime meals are operating as life-saving centers in communities where food is increasingly scarce. But here in Turkana, things are different.
Because of lack of food, most pupils have gone back home to join their parents in searching for food. They don't see the need of coming to school since there is no food. They'd rather be with their parents and search for food.
The worst effects of the drought have not spared the elderly and expecting mothers in this region. Many are forced to walk long distances in search of the now common wild fruit for survival.
I have stayed for 1 week now without any meal. I just depend on the wild fruits. This kid that I'm carrying will have nothing to eat when I finally deliver. Nothing.
This is where I usually sleep without anything to eat. Look at my stomach. It's sunken because of hunger. I just have this wild fruit. This is my only meal for survival.
The government has downplayed the whole situation, maintaining that it has in place measures to address it.
The government of Kenya has approved 2 billion shillings to be spent within this week in water tracking, making sure that boreholes and water pans are working.
The government says it has set up measures to address the current drought situation in this region. However, a number of days later, several villages here in Turkana County are yet to receive any portion of the relief food, and so many residents still go to bed empty stomachs. Roncliffe Odit, BBC, Turkana, Kenya.
This is BBC Focus on Africa from BBC World News with me, Peter Okwacha. Still to come, Mimi with the sports, as Japan's 2020 Olympics chief quits over corruption allegations. I'm Peter Okwacha. The top stories this hour. Cyclone Idai has triggered a massive disaster in southern Africa which could affect millions of people, the UN says. Huge areas of Mozambique are underwater. Hundreds are still missing in neighboring Zimbabwe. The government is conducting search and rescue operations. A state of emergency has been declared. Now, with just 10 days to go to the set date for the UK's departure from the European Union, there's still a lot of confusion about how the country's relationship with the rest of the world will evolve. There are those who argue that African countries could actually benefit from a UK out of Europe, but others warn it won't be that straightforward. The BBC's Thomas Nadi has been speaking to some business owners in Ghana.
Freshly cut fruits are being processed for export to the UK. Blue Skies has its largest consumer base in the UK and exports about 1,000 tons of these products every month, worth about $135,000. It's one of the many companies here that's deeply concerned about Brexit because they export to the European market via the UK. Hugh Powell of Blue Sky says that his company has suffered losses in the last 2 years due to Brexit.
If we move to world trade rules and tariffs with these fruits, overnight we could find hundreds of thousands of pounds impact to our business.
Uncertainty over what Brexit will look like in the end doesn't help.
Ghana is UK's 5th largest trade partner in sub-Saharan Africa. Trade between the two countries is worth about $2 billion. Many here are concerned about how renegotiation of trade deals following UK's withdrawal from the EU will affect business.
Praise Export Service Limited, a Ghanaian food processing company that exports its products to the UK, hopes to take advantage of any trade regulations that might be more flexible than EU terms.
The likely opportunities are that as a business, we may be able to negotiate directly with our distributors in the UK, and this time around we would have to deal with them as distributors, not really falling back on EU requirements, but solely UK requirements.
That UK would want to exit.
Brexit may also open opportunities for African countries generally.
I want to believe that if African countries could come together, we will be able to negotiate from a position of strength and to be able to correct some of those imbalances that we have been used to in terms of the fact that we negotiated in the time past from a position of weak. But now we can correct that.
As the delay on Brexit continues, no one really knows what will happen. But most agree that if any transition doesn't happen smoothly, many businesses will suffer and jobs will be lost. Thomas Nadi, BBC News, Ghana.
Brexit. You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. It's not time for some sports. Take it away, Mimi.
Thank you very much, Peter. South Africa have told FIFA that they are interested in hosting the 2023 Women's World Cup. They're among a record 9 countries that want to host. The Football World Governing Body says that each football association has until the 16th of April to submit its bidding registration. In 2010, South Africa hosted the Men's World Cup. The coach of Cameroonian top flight club Young Sports Academy of Bamenda, Emmanuel Dumbe Bosso, has been kidnapped by unidentified gunmen. Bosso, who won the Cameroon Cup in 2013 with the team, was taken hostage as he headed to a training session at the club stadium. The club is based in the city of Bamenda, which is in one of the 2 English-speaking regions in Cameroon, where secessionists have been fighting government forces for almost 3 years in a bid for independence. And a warning, the next story has some flash photography. The head of Japan's Olympic Committee is stepping down over corruption allegations relating to the awarding of the 2020 Games in Tokyo. Tsunekazu Takeda is being investigated by French prosecutors who are looking into claims that a bribe was paid to secure Tokyo's winning bid. The Japanese government has always insisted its Tokyo bid is clean. The company to which the payment was made is linked to the son of former World Athletics chief Senegal's Lamine Diack, who was a member of the International Olympic Committee when it was awarded the Games. The son, Papa Massata Diack, also faces corruption allegations, which he denies. And DR Congo striker Dieu Merci Bokani has pulled out of his country's squad ahead of their 2019 decisive Africa Cup of Nations qualifier at home to Liberia due to injury. The 33-year-old was included in a 24-man squad selected by coach Florent Ibenge for their Group G match in Kinshasa on the 24th of March. Bokani had been due to have marked his return to international football after just over a 2-year break. And finally, Cameroon football legend Samuel Eto'o has held a football clinic in his country. The former Barcelona and Inter Milan star took part in an exercise with students at a public school in the town of Manju on Monday. The 38-year-old star, who now plies his trade in Qatar, even tried his hand at some goalkeeping, as you can see there. He's been speaking about why he's done it in his native country.
My concern and my will was that the first one should be at home in Cameroon, and then we will go around Africa. They are Africans because among these children we have Central Africans, Cameroonians, but they are African. The most important thing is that we are at home in Cameroon. This is a land that welcomes everyone, and I am honored to have shared this moment with them.
And that's all the sport, Peter.
Many thanks, Mimi. Well, we've heard about Samuel Eto'o from Mimi there, and it's not just footballers who are good with their feet. We've been catching up with Khalil from Senegal, who's taking rollerblading to another level. The 16-year-old from Dakar is the country's champion in the slalom category, which means he's required to perform some highly skilled tricks. The BBC's Arwa Barkala went to meet him.
Inline skating, for me, it's not a job. It's just for passion. My name is Khalil Sourenjai. I'm 16 and I started doing inline skating when I was 2. My first competition was, I was 4. I take the first place and it was a very good competition for me. My father is the man who, he's the one who gave me his rollerblade, and I think that my father is the one man who really give me the passion and the love for skating. Last year I won on a contest in Paris. It's a big contest where every big skater can compete, where the level is at the top. At the beginning I was the only Senegalese man here, the only African. There people are always together, they travel together, and the fact that I'm the only one, it can be stress for me. It's a good pressure for me. I want to say to everybody that they should try to do inline skating in life.
Very impressive skills there from Khalil. Don't forget, you can get in touch with me and some of the team on Twitter. I'm at Okwoche. But for now, from me, Peter Okwoche, that's the end from Focus on Africa for today. Thanks for watching.